So Much More Than Loss, a short story from the collection entitled Old Blades, Older Magic, by E.S. Wynne.
I'm free now. The bonds I tied around us have broken and fallen away. I never realized how much a working like that could hurt me, how much it could hurt us. I just knew I wanted you. I just knew I needed you. Even if I had to wait a lifetime, or more, to be with you. 5 years. That's how long we lasted. That's how many memories stretch between our first kiss and the last. Long time by the standards of the age and place we lived in before. 5 years. Feels like a lifetime. And you, my desired one, always there. Always by my side. Always by my side, but not really. Tied to me, but always looking elsewhere. Always trying to break free. It's my fault. I know that. I take full responsibility for pinning you in place, for tying us together in some grand karmic knot that lasted through whatever lives we lived in the long dark between when I last saw you, when I watched the light fade from your eyes, and I cursed the skies, the gods and goddesses of the men of the woods and of old Rome, for letting those two men rape the life from you. Those two men. Always those same two men. But it's my fault that we were snared together, you and I. I barely knew you, yet I tied myself to you, trying to save you, thinking you were a kindred spirit. I was fool enough to think that you were like me, that you thought in the same ways as I did, felt the same way about honor and commitment and sacrifice and love. I was fool enough to believe that you had the same heart beating in your chest that beats in mine. I was a fool. I was wrong. I was so very wrong. And it hurt so damn much learning that. When I look back to the long ago before, most of what I remember is haze, is phantoms, passing sensations, remembered sadness and smiles. I don't know if you remember anything from back then, from the lives we lived together, before the working, before all of this. When I look back, it's all shades, ideas, fragmented frames that don't fit together quite right, shards of someone else's thoughts. Some of it is clear, but just barely. Some of it, like the black of your hair, like the white of the mist. I remember the way the white would cloak the stone walls near home, crawl along the cracks like ghostly fingers. I remember the vibrant green, the trickle of cold water down the stony creek. I remember Pater. Picture him as an old man standing upon a wall, stoic, wiry and balding, important to the people. Of all the retirees in a place I've come to believe could be Luke Valium, he'd held the highest rank in his old life, and the people of the village looked up to him, treated him like an oracle, the wise old sage that kept them safe from the men of the woods. That village, that was home. That was the place where we lived. I was born there, a later daughter to a retired Roman soldier who had dedicated himself to the fort and the Romano-Briton village there. Our family was firmly entrenched with the local folk of the village, but my father still believed strongly in the values of old Rome. He must have been a bit of a heretic, though, someone who thought for himself, to have chosen to move so far from the capital of the empire. You could see it in the things he did, things like choosing to name me Nemea, after the home of the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons, instead of following the more popular ways of naming daughters like they were property. Sometimes I wonder if he'd been hoping I'd be born male. Sometimes I wonder if he ever realized how appropriate my name would turn out to be. Rome had been taken by Christianity, and what little word we got out of the empire was that more and more of the old ways were being lost or cast aside with each passing day. My father had seen the withdrawal of the last garrisons out of Britain first hand, and it had left a bitter taste in his mouth for the new empire. Mars was our patron deity, followed closely by Jupiter and Minerva. Strength, stoicism, wisdom. We weren't about to leave our homes, our fort, our wall, and our territories, and pull back to a Christian Rome we had never known as any kind of home. The ancient ways were proud and proven. I think sometimes my father thought we were the last true remnants of Rome as it had been, as he and I hoped it would be again. We took great pride in our ancestry, in the stories of the empire as it once was. Every night there were tales told in Latin at the side of the hearth, stories of great heroes, of legends from older cultures, distant places. Pater loved stories, and the more ancient or distant their origin, the better. He would listen, rapt, as others imparted their tales, and he seemed to remember every word, would tell them all with impeccable accuracy months, even years later. I grew up fueled by those tales, grew up wanting to be like the warlords and the proud men who stood up in defense of the Roman way of life, who stood up to barbarian hordes, who slew whole armies of Carthaginians with a single singing sword. The local children, those not of Rome, they soaked up the stories almost as avidly as Pater, and I remember the way they looked at him, and I, with awe. We were Romans. We were the descendants of heroes, of gods and goddesses. We had fire and fight and honor in our blood. I don't remember much about my mother. I know she was younger than Pater, that she was wholly native and not at all of Rome. Brothers and sisters, they were there, but I only remember them as hazy images, shapes playing on the floor, some just passing through, momentary sparks of mortal life, gone in an instant. Looking back, there are perhaps more things I don't remember than things I do. Only the things I translated forward when I was between lives still come through with any strength. The things that were important to me, the bonds, the urges, the pull, the threads of the working. And you, my memories of you. Tell me sometime, maybe, if you remember. I don't know if you remember me as I was, or the battles I fought to be recognized as the hero of Rome I thought Pater wanted me to be. I wasn't like other girls. I remember getting pushed into the mud more than once for trying to play with the boys, but I didn't let that get to me. I'd seen my sisters, the way they dressed, the things they liked and did, the way they were treated. That wasn't me. That would never be me. I worked hard to be stronger, fiercer, quicker with a sword than any of the boys in Lugavalium who aspired to be soldiers. We were short on fighting men, especially as I got older, and the retirees who had stood side by side with Pater began to fall to the winter winds and the scythe of time. My father was strong, but even he struggled with the ravages of age, becoming less and less a leader and more of an advisor, quietly watching from the sidelines. If I had been the daughter of anyone other than Pater, I probably would have been beaten for my ideas, my ways. I remember being very direct with him always. Remember the way he would encourage me to hold myself like a man, walk like a man, speak my mind with the same fire and frankness that a man would. I remember that he would sit back and listen to me, just listen, and only offer advice when I would run out of steam and rage and begin to flounder in my sea of words. I was a man, or at least that's how I saw myself. I was a proud warrior of Rome, a rough stone destined to be shaped into a cutting blade, into a hero. There were men who were interested in me, who would whisper cruel or lusty suggestions into my mind, but I never saw myself as being anyone's wife, anyone's whore. If anything, I would be the one to take a wife for myself. I would be the head of my family after Pater's eventual passing. Didn't matter that I wasn't the oldest, that I hadn't been born male. A position of respect, distinction. That was what I wanted for myself. That was what I would earn. Pater had suggestions, ideas. He met with other men in the community, bent the way they looked at me until I was seen less as a woman and more as a warrior bearing the very future of old Rome in my calloused hands. In the end, I even abandoned my name. I knew that if I was to be accepted by the other soldiers, I would have to be reborn as male. I remember thinking about the decision, the name, considering, then choosing the most powerful, most respected name I could think of at the time. I chose Julius. Later, my father would joke with me when we were alone, tease me quietly by calling me Julia, but I could tell from the light in his eyes that he was proud, that I was the son he'd wanted for so long. And that was when I met you, desired one. Not long after I became Julius, not long after I took on my duties as a soldier of Rome in Lugavalium. You were dancing. I was exhausted and drunk. The night is a blur even now, especially now, centuries later. Your eyes were the same shape, though, and your hair, a midnight banner. I was entranced by you, a native, wholly native, and nothing in you of Rome, so far as we knew. I felt like Pater, like a Roman citizen out of place in an alien wild, seduced by a young vixen with fire behind her eyes. That soul of yours, even centuries later, that fire in you still burns as hot as I remember it. Warm and alluring in the beginning, vicious and scarring by the end. But that first night, I couldn't take my eyes off of you, and you kept meeting mine, smiling. I knew even then that I wanted you as my wife. I wanted you to be the mother of our children. I wanted to build you a home and make you proud. I wanted to be your lord, with you as my lady. I remember that you used to visit me on the wall, that you'd bring me warm and bready little sweets to eat when the rain came in fierce and cold. I remember the first time you kissed my cheek and left me stunned, utterly stunned and speechless. And I remember the first time I swept you up and carried you to a soft place in the darkness, kissed you full on the lips as you stripped me of my armor. There was no shock at who I was, what I was. You knew. You'd known all along, and you loved me for it. Pater died before the spring when we were to be wed came. Mother became a shadow, gone in the darkness. I was broken by his loss, but I held on. I had you. I had a space to fill, the massive space my father had left behind, and that left no time for tears. None of my brothers contested it when I stated that I would pick up where Pater had left off. I took the family home for myself, and set you the task of looking after Mother. I was busy, and the days flew by, but your smile, so genuine, so beautiful, it got me through. It kept me moving. The rains came heavy and cold, lingered and drizzled long and on. The men of the woods grew restless, and I remember watching as some of my friends were cut down when the barbarians came. I remember screaming over their corpses. I remember sticking one of those brutes through the throat with a blade, baring teeth as I drove the steel as deep as it would go. For Pater, the thought blossomed through my head over and over again. For old Rome, for Pater. Spring came, and with it the preparations for our wedding. I was praying for a child, praying that our first would come close on the heels of our union before all of Lugavalium. Looking back, it's obvious to me why you never bore us a child, but back then I still believed in miracles, believed that if the Christ could be born of a virgin, then surely something greater, some hero worthy of the history of old Rome, could be born of our love. But we never made it to our wedding day. The night you died still comes as a blur. All of it but the moment when everything unraveled at once. The moment when those two men came out of the bushes and tore us apart with such horrifying ease. Do you remember the way they hit you, seized you, threw you to the dirt, and ripped at you? I watched you drop, screamed your name just before something hit me hard enough to blind me, a second blow knocking the breath from my lungs. I couldn't focus, and then I was in the mud. My head was turned to the side, pinned there. I remember watching in horror, fighting against the man holding me down. He laughed. He wanted me to see, to watch as they took turns with you, cut you, did such horrible things to you that even now I ache to remember them. It didn't take long for the barbarians to discover that I wasn't male, and when they were done with you, they turned their attentions to me, raped me, but not as viciously. I fought until I had no strength left in me. I fought until I passed out, surrendering, wishing for death. Another blur, another pause, this one stretching, full of shadows and pain. I remember aching all over, wanting to die. I remember lying awake in a drafty shack with the sound of surf pounding all around me. I ate whatever they brought me, didn't have the strength to resist, let the men that came do whatever they wanted to me, cried as I became heavy with unwanted child, with what I could only see as a beast, an abomination rising out of my own traitorous flesh. Death was all I wanted. Death and your arms in the afterlife. But it all seemed too far. Wouldn't take me no matter how desperately I wished for it. At some point I was led out of the shack, taken somewhere. I saw the cliff overlooking the sea, and in the moment it became my chance. Fighting, summoning up that warrior spirit that had lain almost forgotten, I broke free of the hands holding me and rushed for the precipice, threw myself to the sky, and fell into surging oblivion. A little boy saw me drop and cried out. I closed my eyes against the darkness, welcomed the winds as they carried me to the rocky shore below. And even still I didn't die. Only the child I was carrying did. And the injuries I sustained were so serious that I could never bear children again. There was a man who took me in, a healer with a fondness for purple, who saw my survival as an omen, a man who was pater to the men of the woods, in a sense, a heathen, a woodland opposite to my own stoic father. Wolf he was, and Wolf he named me. Wolf, woman who walks like a man. I spent the rest of my life with him, or nearly so. Not as wife or whore, but as an apprentice, or a brother, perhaps. In the beginning, we talked frequently about my curse, my injuries, the horror that had nested in my womb. I hadn't wanted the demon, but part of me missed it, missed the feeling of creation, of being mother to something, to someone. I asked him about it. Not a demon, he told me. He taught me to see the child as something kind, something benevolent, a guardian who had traded its life for mine. As he saw it, I had tried to sacrifice myself, and the All-Father had rejected my gamble for the great beyond. I was not yet ready to be Walkure. That was what he said. I had roads to walk still, lessons to learn. The All-Father had taken the child's soul instead of mine, and broken my belly as both boon and punishment, made it barren as any other man's. Though I was already male in my own mind, a man in action and word, the loss, the penalty levied on my defiant body ached from time to time, ached with memory, with what might have been, with what was denied me. Woman who walks like a man, wolf, soldier of Rome. I had many names while I lived among the men of the woods. I was never allowed to wander far enough to find my way back to Lugavalium. Felt too shamed to return even if I knew where it was or how to get there. I stayed with Wolf and tried to understand the dichotomy of my body and my mind. I learned something of being a woman while I lived with and learned from him. I learned something of being a healer, of being softer, less stoic and rigid. I'd whisper to you at night, whisper your name, but you weren't there. You'd moved on, gone off into the great beyond, but I thought about you every day, and it became the basis for the working, for the bonds that would draw us together again. You were in my heart every day. You were the one who had accepted me, the one who had loved me, the one who had seen my true self and delighted in it without trying to change me. I clung to that. I clung to your memory, held it close, wished often for the day when you might come back, might hear the whispers I set loose upon the wind, calling for you, calling you home. I had dreams with you in them, dreams in which you were alive, only traveling, or only just around the corner. Dreams in which we were both whole, unscarred, home in Lugavalium, and you smiling so lovingly, your belly heavy with our child. Dreams of Rome as it was, as it had been in the stories Potter would tell. Dreams. Dreams and nothing more. Nothing more, no matter how hard I wished for any of it to be true. Wolf's sickness was only a seed when I met him. A cough, sudden sweats that came in the day, shivers that came in the night. As I learned his ways, I tried to slow it, tried to drive it out of him, but nothing seemed capable of saving him. Later he said that it was a gift of the underworld, that the ancestors were calling him home, a little piece of every illness of the heart, mind, soul, or luck, that he had driven out of others, all massed and balled up into one he carried like a prize. As it grew worse, I became more and more desperate to save him. I would spend hours cleansing his skin with steaming water and rough cloth. I would scream to the disease, press my face against his chest, and howl into the darkness I saw there. I would challenge the parasitic blackness bloating in his soul, but it was strong, so strong, and just when I thought it was gone, just when I'd fall back, sweating and panting and hoarse from screaming, certain I'd driven the disease from him at long last, I'd find my efforts futile again. He'd wheeze and slobber blood. I'd sleep beside him, listening to every breath in the night, counting them, counting the space between them, looking for some sign that he was getting better, some sign or omen of something I hadn't yet done to save him. Despite it all, the sickness grew steadily, grew until his breathing was only a labored wheeze, until he could no longer rise or leave his bed. I did what I could to care for him, but I was invisible beside him. When people came to ask for help, when they brought what meager food they had, they treated me like a pet, like a curiosity. They came to see Wolf the healer, not Wolf, the woman who walks as a man. I never expected to see any generosity from the men of the woods, though I had lived among them, treated some of them side by side with and under Wolf's guidance. I had never really taken the time to notice or interact with them. I saw them as barbarians, dangerous and cruel. I knew only a few scattered words of their language, heard the rest of what they spoke as animal grunts and bestial expressions of passion and rage. In every face I saw shadows of the two who had destroyed my desired one, who had destroyed me, and so I kept my distance. But the men of the woods, their wives and children, they surprised me when Wolf became too sick to leave his bed. I remember the way they came to him. I remember the way they would come in 4s and 5s and gently wash his forehead with cool water, rinse away the sweat, and kiss his hands as if they were the hands of a god. What little they had in terms of food they shared freely with us, and I would feed Wolf as best I could with what they brought that was warm and liquid, or that could be boiled into a broth. During his decline, I made him my life, and in his few moments of lucidity during the nights we were alone together, he would tell me about the legends of his people, about the gods and the ancestors he was soon going to see. Many times, he would talk about the wolves he saw around me. 3 of them, he said. Wolves of the end of the world, he called them. Wolves that walk in the silent snow. Later, those with sight would talk of that same trio of wolves following in my footsteps. It was cold the night that Wolf passed into the great beyond. I saw it happen. I caught the change in his breathing, sat up suddenly in our bed and put my hands on his chest, feeling for something. I don't know. The moment, the movement, was reflexive. His eyes opened wide, and then he inhaled deep and sudden, and I watched his spirit trickle out of him like smoke, like purple smoke. I was in awe, and then I was terrified, in pain, lost. Wolf was dead, and once again I was alone. There was a funeral rite, but I didn't attend. I wandered further than I'd ever wandered before, and there in the mists a voice told me that I had earned my wings as Valkyrie. I saw the change in how the men of the woods looked at me as I made my way back to the home that Wolf and I had shared. Those with sight saw my wide, black-feathered wings and whispered what I'd heard in the mists. Valkyrie. Few came looking for healing after that. Some came to ask me about the afterlife, or to ask me to help them contact the spirits of children, or parents that had died. My reputation as Valkyrie made me even more of an outsider than I was before, and I spent my days alone, lonely and crying, speaking to the walls, hoping Wolf or my desired one would hear me. Eventually the men of the woods stopped coming. In the spring that followed Wolf's death, there was no reason for them to seek me out. It was a good season. There was so much beauty and life beyond the dark walls of my home. But it was Wolf who had dealt with the living. I was the one who walked side by side with the dead. The darkness I sunk into became like a disease. I tried to heal myself, but my life felt hollow, without purpose or point. I was split between 2 worlds, belonging to none. A woman, but also a man, and neither all at once. A Roman, a barbarian, and yet neither. Not wanted in the world of the living. Denied by the world of the dead. I started taking walks, long walks, while the darkness brewed and twisted in my soul. On one of my walks I found that familiar cliff. Or maybe one I only convinced myself looked like that cliff from before. I sat on the edge and stared down at the sea. I waited and waited. The sun sank. I was alone. It got cold. I rose when I started to shiver. I faced the darkness and said one last prayer to someone. Maybe a god or goddess known by the men of the woods. Maybe a god or goddess of old Rome. I raised my arms and called out to the sky, to the patchy clouds and the stars so bright overhead. I called out to the Valkyrie, my sisters, and closed my eyes. My desired one, you came and filled my thoughts. You filled my being. And the last breath I took before I stepped off that same cliff tasted so sweet, so cold, and for a moment I felt my wings, felt so alive, like I might soar away and find you among the swirling stars, but there was nothing. Nothing. Darkness came with a sound, and then it was over. I was cut loose. I was free. But not completely. I could see the stirrings, the strings of ritual, of the working that bound me to you. A working crafted through longing, through long nights of need, of crying and desperation. It was mine, my doing. You and I, wrapped up as one, and the magic in the binding was so strong, so reassuring. I couldn't help it. I latched on, threw all that I was into those bindings. I strengthened them with everything I had in me. I built dreams in the ether and sent them on to my next life. I crafted frames of future and fantasy. A field of dandelions, where we would say our first I love you. A misty shore full of cold gray rocks, like the creek we used to meet at. Symbols of awakening, peppered through the darkness, cropping up whenever we were close. Symbols to guide us together, to make us realize that our connection was meant to be, and I planted them all. I bent the path. I continued the working. I set us on a course to collide in a time when I could finally be male, when we could finally have the children we'd only talked about before. It was a strong working, but karma, the will within the white noise, is stronger still. We were born offset from one another, left to claw, to spin through currents of time and life, bouncing in and out, mere meters from each other's lives, yet invisible. Meeting once, then spending years with only the memory like a faint taste lingering in the mind. The knots twisted tighter, and then suddenly we were together, in each other's arms again. It felt so good. So right in so many ways. I felt like my hard work had finally paid off. I'd brought you back into my life, and finally we were happy. Finally we could enjoy the long life together that we'd wanted in the life before. But you weren't happy being bound to me. You enjoyed my body for a while, but when the thrill of lust wore off, there was no reason for you to keep up the facade that had attracted me to you. All the kindness, all the generosity and empathy you'd pretended, it started to crumble and fall away, leaving only darkness, flames wild and hot, hungry and selfish, careless what they devoured. I didn't know it then, but that was you. That was always you. No, I was a fool. I saw the crumbling as a sign of depression, a symptom of being cut so often by the blades of the world around you. I took an approach that was very rational, very material. I doted on you. I strengthened the bonds, did everything I could to make you smile, but you just threw yourself harder against the working. The bindings became knots you wrapped your fragile fingers into, screaming and thrashing. Your wings ached for flight. And then came the day when you finally tore it all apart. tore me apart, and rose like a line of fire into the wide heavens. But the bonds of such a working don't break so easily. Spirit is like a living being. It changes, it heals. The ties that kept us tightly bound to one another drew us back together over and over again. We'd fight, we'd rage, and the bonds would tighten slowly, almost imperceptibly, until we were too tired. Then, that's when they'd draw us back together again, bind us in place. A black net of old intent. We turned to the outside, looking for help, looking for freedom. We both did, and true to form, while I reached into the ether and made my appeal to the heavens, you reached into the material world. We both became beacons. When dark Zuli came to me, she saw what had gone wrong, saw how blind I was, and she cut me down to my core, shaved away all that I'd built to bind me to you. For you, it wasn't a god or a goddess that came. It was those same two men, those two barbarians. And when they came for you in this life, you launched yourself into their arms. You let them tear you away from me as easily as they had before. I was lost, cut and bleeding, and instead of standing beside me in my moment of deepest darkness, you let me fall deeper. And I saw. I guess I had to fall to see. Even still, even now, even knowing what I know, it hurts. I have a feeling that it will always hurt, knowing that despite all I did, all the effort I put into the working, into loving you, you could so easily give it all up to be with another, to love men who cut you so deeply and so many times in so many lives. It was an old working, strong and resilient. It took a year for me to truly see the bonds for what they were, for me to find those with the sight who could trace their dark lines, help sever them forever. During that year you reached out to Hecate like a child, and with all the smiling grace of a mother she took your hand. She's leading you now. She's taken your care into her hands, and where she leads you I cannot follow. I am not meant to follow, nor do I have any desire to anymore. Your road through the underworld is earned, my desired one. It's something you wanted, something you built for you and you alone. I cannot save you. I cannot bind you up and hold you out of your hardships anymore. All I can do is pray that the rugged roads you wander are short, that the smooth paths are straight and well lit, and that you rise again, find happiness in the next life, if not in this one. I have not heard anything from the barbarians since the bonds were cut. The ethers are calm. Not like when we were thrashing against the bonds and became like magnets for car accidents, volcano eruptions, and the ire of the violently insane. I had the opportunity to face both of those men in this life, and for that I am grateful, even if the words I delivered in place of the point of a sword were ultimately only wasted. They too have other roads to walk, roads no longer tied to mine. The working itself is ended. The bonds are cut, and all that remains is a fading memory, a scar where you once were. It was my working, and so now with these very words, and with the intent of every pair of eyes to pass this page, or hear my will read aloud, I unravel any knots of the ritual that might still remain, break the bonds, and shatter the spell, so that it might be as if it never was. You are free, desired one, compañero. You are free to fly, as am I. and the whole wide bosom of the world waits with all its horrors and treasures to welcome us as we live these momentary, wholly separate lives, never to meet again. So mote it be, desired one. So mote it be.